It's January 1971 and Van der Graaf Generator are on the road as part of the Charisma Records 6 Bob Tour. Devised by label boss Tony Stratton Smith, the package offered audiences the chance to see his 3 most promising live acts, Genesis, Lindisfarne and Van der Graaf, all for the bargain price of 30 pence. To put this in context, most gigs cost double or more to go to, with vinyl records themselves retailing for about £3 each, which was about half a day's pay at this time. The then practically unknown Genesis would open these shows, with Van der Graaf closing and Lindisfarne playing the middle slot, which is strange because they were the only one of the trio to enjoy any real chart success at this point. In later interviews, all involved look back fondly on this successful tour and have reminisced about the fun they had on the tour bus, with the more reserved public schoolboy Genesis camped at the quieter front of the bus and the more raucous and, shall we say, experimental Van der Graaf lurking at the back in the darkness. Even by early 1970s standards, Van der Graaf Generator were an unusual band. Firstly, they didn't have a recognised guitarist, with Peter Hammill only occasionally playing acoustic. Instead, their sound and stage presence was largely dominated by David Jackson and his sharp, stabbing saxophone playing. Complementing this was Hugh Banton's expansive and alien-sounding keyboards, with Guy Evans's intense drumming providing the power and precision that the complex rhythms and dark concepts behind the songs demanded. This all combined to create a dense and disturbing melodic groove, the perfect setting for our main songwriter and vocalist Peter Hammill. Over the late 60s, Hammill increasingly observed how musicians were using their instruments in extreme and more distorted ways, pushing them to their limits in ways that vocalists just weren't, and as such he was inspired to create a highly stylized and operatic singing style, an exaggerated received pronunciation mixed with controlled screams, shrieks and growls.
And I'm not writing poems now, and though I don't feel quite like dying, there is something deep inside me softly crying.
Despite being a mild-mannered, humorous and cultured character behind the scenes, Hammill's songwriting centred around themes of isolation, paranoia and self-doubt, often delivered in harsh, accusatory tones. He has claimed that by releasing all of these darker thoughts and demons out of himself meant that he didn't have to internalise them as much, and as such, he manages to retain an inner peace and contentment. However, by the spring of 1971, the mood of his songs was darkening further, as their grueling touring now took them to Germany for a non-stop 3-week trek across the country that saw them playing practically every night. Travelling between gigs in an old ice cream truck, Hammill became truly sick of the airports, taxis and motorway showers, and the sense of loneliness, isolation and claustrophobia started to cast a shadow over his work. He wasn't just writing poems anymore, and most of the Porn Hearts album and future solo tracks like German Overalls would be devised during this period.
Why are we dying?
In May, the band's fortunes started to improve as they found themselves featured on the front of the Melody Maker newspaper. This was the first large-scale media exposure of their career, with the paper including a feature on each band member. In June, the band found a welcome pause in their touring schedule and retreated to Luxford House in Sussex, a huge Tudor mansion house rented by Charisma boss Tony Stratton Smith. Allegedly haunted, this ancient building had a dark vibe that fellow Charisma band Genesis tapped into as they developed the more sinister aspects of their Nursery Crime album there. The ancient Luxford family who built this property had funded the 16th century war against Spain, and the house's old wooden beams were thought to come from the wreckage of a sunken Spanish Armada ship, with the ghosts of the sailors reportedly stalking the house for revenge. And so, it would become the perfect setting for Van der Graaf to develop material for their next album, one that would immerse itself in feelings of drowning, claustrophobia, and the wrath of the sea. But before we take the plunge, it's time for an important safety announcement.
I am the spirit of dark and lonely water, ready to trap the unwary, the show-off, the fool. And this is the kind of place you'd expect to find me. But no one expects to find me here. It seems too ordinary. But that pool is deep. The boy is showing off. The bank is slippery. Only a fool would ignore this. But there's one born every minute. Under the water there are traps. Old cars, bedsteads, weeds, hidden depths. It's the perfect place for an accident.
Our album opens with a man alone on a cliff edge, waiting to jump. Swirling winds, whistling flute, and a haunting, beckoning saxophone draw him closer and closer to the precipice. Drums and organ gather momentum, as if to push him over the edge, and then he looks down to see dead bodies, people he knows and loves, their bodies crashing into the seawater below. If this is some sort of game, he thinks twice about playing it. Lemmings themselves are small rodents, and when their populations grow too large, they collectively disperse, a herd-like migration to ensure maximum survival. Although it makes a great metaphor about collective non-thinking, the idea of lemmings committing mass suicide by following each other over cliff edges is a fanciful misconception. In reality, they do nothing of the kind. It's an urban myth that comes from a 1950s Walt Disney nature documentary that staged footage of the lemmings apparently jumping to their fate. The footage in question was filmed on a studio set, with the film crew literally throwing box loads of the creatures over the cliff edge to fake the idea of them jumping. This is where it all comes from, and before researching this documentary, I, like you, and like Peter Hamill, knew nothing about this. Anyway, back to the music, of which there is no escape but to move forward.
We have looked up on the heroes and they are gone wanting. We have looked hard across the land, but we can see no dawn. We have no dare to see the sky, but we are still bleeding. We are drawing near to the cliffs. Now we can hear the call. The clouds are piling mountain shapes. There is no escape except to go forward.
Hamill adds further doom-laden imagery about blindly walking to one's own death, as if we are helpless, with no cause left but to die.
What cause is there left but to die?
The track then abruptly shifts gear with the menacing sound of a distorted electric razor as we are thrown into grinding industrial machinery.
It's out of control, out of control. Greasy machinery slides on the rails, young minds and bodies on steel spokes impaled.
The song describes our bodies being impaled on steel spikes and our bones crushed by the cogs of the out-of-controlled, iron-throated monsters.
There still is time.
As the music calms, we are encouraged not to follow the hatred of the mob-like pack mentality, but instead hope for a brighter future. We all ultimately have to die, but why choose to make it any sooner? Our singer chooses to live, or at least he tries to, as the cogs of the song slowly but somehow ominously wind down. Side 1 continues to examine the complexity of the human condition and the contradictions and self-doubt in our minds. It's a mental health awareness course, but 70s style.
The killer lives inside me. Yes, I can feel him move.
In this brooding opening, Hamill contemplates how mankind has the capacity to both kill and harm, perhaps ourselves more than anyone else, with this killing instinct slicing inside his own mind.
But then his eyes will rise and stare through mine. He'll speak my words and slice my mind inside.
The band's playing has a sense of grandeur as Hamill next reflects on the angels that live inside us, providing a calm and healing to the killer's self-inflicted wounds. If this was any ordinary band, our pleasant ballad about yin and yang unity would end there. But Van der Graaf were no ordinary band, and as such, they released the screams of further self-doubt with a passage of progressive rock playing at its finest. Peter Hamill was fond of throwing scientific terms into his song titles, and here we have an erg, a unit of energy, man's energy, the driving force between our mixed and conflicting emotions. The track excels with Guy Evans' thumping, punch-in-your-face drumming being perfectly complemented by Jackson's knife-stabbing saxophone notes, while Hugh Banton's aggressive organ provides a sense of entrapment and claustrophobia which grounds us further into the ground. As a Freudian allegory, the killers are our id, the primitive, impulsive, emotional aspects of man, while the angels act as our conscience, our inner sense of good and God. As the song ends, Hamill steps beyond these two extremes to reflect on himself as a whole, his Freudian ego, the mediator between the killers and angels. He accepts that he's just a man, both and neither good and bad. He makes peace with this, a refugee that finally finds a home in himself. Alone on the edge of the world, lighthouses stand in darkness, isolated, exposed, and lonely. They are omens of danger, and their only beacon and light is in itself a warning that destruction is near. What better setting for side 2 of this album? A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers tells the story of a coastal watchman consumed by remorse over the sailors he can't save. He can warn them, but he cannot rescue them. This leads to a guilt complex as he begins to feel that he is actually letting them die. In the opening witness part, Hamill's disjointed voice suggests the multiple personalities as the lighthouse keeper becomes haunted by the ghosts of the shipwrecks, and as the song unfolds, his isolation turns inwards and his mind and the music echoes the turbulence of the waters.
On the table lies mine paper, and my tower is built on stone. I only have lost scissors, I only have a protest home.
In a brief moment of early calm, we hear David Jackson's flute, illustrating the flight and call of seagulls in the sky. A brief respite, but as a mist creeps in over the sea, we hear the foghorn of an approaching ship. This distress call is too late, and the industrial crash of organ and clutter of cymbals suggests another ship has met its fate on the rocks it could not see. Heavenly organ music suggests the souls of the dead sailors are sent to heaven. HMS is a nautical phrase for His Majesty's ship, and here it is presented as a section called SHM, Simple Harmonic Motion. Another of Hamill's scientific references suggesting the lighthouse keeper's cyclic guilt as he confronts the ghosts of the dead sailors, figures who he increasingly identifies with. His grasp on reality and the spirit world begins to dissolve like the seawater itself, as we hear the claustrophobic Cosmos tours presented as several different songs layered on top of each other to create a chaotic swirl as the lighthouse keeper circles the spiral steps of his domain until he reaches the top, where staggering madly over the top he falls.
Maelstrom of my memory is a vampire and it feeds on me. Now staggering madly over the brink I fall. Lighthouses might house the key, but can I reach the door?
We next find our narrator floating on the sea, and amidst biblical references of walking on water and mangers, he finds himself beginning to regret taking his own life. And as he approaches heaven, its light does not welcome him, it blinds him. Panic sets in as the clot thickens.
Where guides my hand? How can the hands of others reach me? Where will I find what I grow for? Who is going to teach me? I am a Neo, we can't see any way out of here. Crashing sea, atrophy, history. Chance has lost my Guinevere.
The swirling, splashing music suggests our protagonist's panic as he tries to fight off drowning.
I don't want to be one wave in the water.
Frantically trying to save his own life, he realises that he doesn't want to be a wave in the water.
But the sea will drag me deep.
And adding symmetry to the album, he sees the suicidal lemmings jumping in and questions choosing the same fate as them. And in a reference to Manerg, he realises his limitations. He is, after all, just a man.
One more haggard drown me!
Peter Hamill deliberately left the ending ambiguous and for the listener to decide what happened. Did the lighthouse keeper swim to safety, or does his lifeless corpse simply drift away? The song concludes with a hopeful and triumphant piano chord progression as our character finds peace with the souls of the dead, perhaps because he has become one himself. The spell of guilt that held a grip on his mind has been broken and all things are apart. Like many sidelong epics from this era, the piece was created in sections, written by different members of the band. It's a real group effort, with producer John Anthony recalling how he and Hamill once sat on a cliff edge looking out at the waves as they decided on the song's construction. For some, A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers is the high watermark of this band's songwriting and a titanic ocean of ambition, while for others it feels slightly adrift, lacking in focus and structure. Personally, and in true Van der Graaf style, I'm somewhat undecided, and like the shifting tide, I find my own opinion on it sways back and forth between these two opposing shores.
All things are
The original plan was to release Porn Hearts as a double album, with side 3 containing short experimental pieces by individual band members. This gave drummer Guy Evans the chance to show off his love of Miles Davis with the British brew flavoured Angle of Incidence. From David Jackson there was a piece called Archimedes Agnostic, which had Latin lyrics written to it, but sadly the track is thought to be lost. Diminutions was Hugh Banson's offering, ethereal, Tangerine Dream style, Kosmische music. From Peter Hamill we have a song entitled W. It's themed around a fire in his childhood school. The track employs much of the abstract feel of Evans and Banson's tracks, suggesting that despite being solo numbers, these tracks may have been presented in another merged suite of songs. It's likely that Theme 1 would also have been included on the planned double album. It was a cover version of a well-known radio theme tune, and included, much to the annoyance of the band, on the US edition of this album. The fourth side would have included re-recorded live in the studio versions of current stage favourites Killer and Darkness, along with a sprawling 15-minute medley of 2 earlier tracks, Squid and Octopus. The album's title came when saxophonist Jackson accidentally mispronounced his horn parts. Hamill then developed the phrase into the idea that no matter how rich or poor we are all pawns in life, and our hearts are all equally exposed and vulnerable. Regular Charisma artist Paul Whitehead brought this concept to life for the cover by showing different historical figures entrapped in fragile, glass-like pawn pieces. Julius Caesar, Joan of Arc, John Lennon and Jesus are amongst the many characters chosen, and although they were all figures of greatness, none could escape the fragile fate of the pawn. The inner photo sleeve is a light-hearted dig at the German army, inspired by the many First World War memorials that the band saw on tour over there. This one in particular, a memorial menace eager for revenge. The photo would have made more sense had one of the album's unreleased tracks, which referenced the fear of German black shirts and totalitarianism, been included. But despite the double album idea and this track being scrapped, they had a photo which, like the music, they knew would make people feel slightly uncomfortable, and so decided to keep it. One has to remember that in 1971 it was not unusual to see silly, ridiculing spoofs of Hitler on British television, and the inner photo is just four young men having a similar laugh, no more and no less. Porn Hearts was finally released in October 1971 to mixed reviews, and whilst it is considered a classic of its genre today, on release it actually sold less than the band's two previous albums. Charisma Records, already losing money with Genesis and other floundering bands, decided to focus more on Lindisfarne, whose Fog on the Tyne, released around the same time, had just hit number 1. However, like Genesis, it was at this time that Van der Graaf started to gain huge success abroad, notably in Italy, where Porn Hearts topped the charts, prompting a series of huge sellout concerts over there. Despite their success, the band remained financially broke, with their weekly wage from Charisma not even covering their touring costs, equipment purchases or studio hiring. The mounting financial pressure began to splinter this band's relationship, and in August 1972 they chose to abandon ship. For the time being at least, their voyage together had run its course. Yet, Van der Graaf Generator were not truly sunk. Their name had merely dropped anchor. The members would continue to play together on Hamill's solo albums before eventually setting sail a few years later under the Van der Graaf flag again. The band created some weird and wonderful music in this period, but what separated them from others was the sheer brutality of the words and music. It's something that the audience experiences and perhaps even endures, survives, rather than merely listening to. It's a testament to a glorious era when bands released thought-provoking and uncompromising music, often swimming against the commercial tide. Like the foreboding Beam of the Lighthouse, Porn Hearts offers us no easy port in a storm. We are thrown into the deep water without a life jacket, left alone in the darkness to sink or to swim.
I want to marry a lighthouse keeper and keep him company. I want to marry a lighthouse keeper and live by the side of the sea. I'll polish his lamps by the light of day so the ships at night can find their way. I want to marry a lighthouse keeper, won't that be okay? We'll take walks along the moonlit bay, maybe find a treasure too. I'd love living in a lighthouse.